Hello, art history students. My name is Mr. Morris. This video is a 10-minute introduction to the art packet routine that we talked about in class. So I just wanted to do more of a formal and kind of easier to understand version if you need to review it when you actually begin the process of completing them for the first time. I'm using the Gothic packet, which is chapter 11 of the Gardeners, pages 322 to 396. You can see that on the screen. Notice that it starts with the art at a glance. This is what you're supposed to look at when you're going back through your packets and you're checking to see, what are the important features, what are the important times and dates that need to be remembered in order for you to do well on the AP test. And sort of the goal of the packs themselves is to make sure that you have a resource at the end that you've completed. It's not just a book or a study material, but it's something that you've done to help remember what we did in the class. If you scroll down to, so art at a glance, once again, movement is already provided for you. You need to find the dates of that movement. 3 identifying features, so everything kind of comes in 2s and 3s. So fill up the space, but make sure that it's summary information. It's not just random facts. So you want to digest your notes and then come back to the art at a glance. You can see that up at the top there, what I'm referring to with that. So you can scroll. I'm going to scroll in, identifying features there. You want to make sure that you complete that after you do your notes. You also want to make sure that when you do historical and cultural facts, that those are, again, relevant facts, not just random dates that are in the book, but ones that you find to be, important kings, important deaths, important wars, anything else that you know is directly connected to the type of art being created. Innovations in materials, again, the stuff of art, the things that it's made out of, what we call the media, and the innovations, that is the ideas on which how they are actually created. So is there new things that happen? For instance, in the Gothic period, stained glass, there is a development and expectation that not only is there a building material change, there's flying buttressing to allow for bigger windows, but there's also an innovation in ideas. It all of a sudden became, instead of about being in a cave in the Gothic period, it was about being more in sort of the light of God, sort of the light of the Word of God. So it's very much a Christian religious kind of context innovation. So those are the types of things that you put there. Artists of note, if there are artists, there aren't a whole lot of artists until about the Middle Ages, but even then they're pretty de-emphasized, except in the Greek context. So in the classical Greek era has sort of a cult of artists. And we'll talk about artisans versus artists, but normally you're going to put a list of people here just as a quick reference. These are the people in the Gothic period that you would need to recognize. For instance, like Gisel or Giselbertus is an important one from the Gothic and Romanesque period. All right, Cornell notes, these, what they are. We summarize them in class. You have your questions and key topics. So you're supposed to structure, not necessarily how I do it in class, so not just lectures or discussions or that sort of thing, but it's more about the ideas. You're not just copying the slides either. Again, you're listening and you're interpreting and you're finding the most important information for you in your own study. So as you answer those questions, they should be connected to an important key topic. Usually it's the title of the slide, but oftentimes you reword it, make sure that you are clumping things together. You can sketch, you can do pictures, whatever you want to do in order to create this. And then at the bottom, as I scroll down, there's 2 pages of it. So a page, and then on the back side of that page is the last part of it. And this should be mostly for lecture. You can also split it up so that it's half lecture and half book notes. And you do 2 nights. You do the lecture and then you do the book notes at home. So you can kind of go back and forth between the two. If you need more space, you can add more paper on the back. But you really need to be focusing on and practicing getting all the information that you need into the least amount of important key facts. Again, not just throwing everything out, but trying to make it. I'm going to make it my mission to make sure that the information that I give you is also important and not necessarily just random facts, although those are cool too, but you don't need to write them down all the time. A summary at the end, please. three summaries so that you remember in Cornell note fashion. Art snapshots. This is sort of the bulk of what the art test is about. When you go back to study, you're going to go back to study flashcards of the actual works. We call this citing or attributing attribution of artwork. It's a very important thing to recognize artwork, to be able to identify its key features, even if you don't know the name of the work. Although there are several anchor works that you'll need to know that will be on the test no matter what. And the Gothic period is a good example of that, because you'll see at least one, maybe two cathedrals and one, maybe two sculptors or artists from this Gothic period on that test at some point. So here you see the art snapshot is a series of flashcards. It's like it kind of keeps them all together, so you could actually fold the paper right on the line between drawing and the picture itself, and that way you can use it to quiz yourself before the Friday test. There's a once a week test in which you need to be aware of these topics as well as the vocabulary and those kinds of things. This is one way you can study for that. A drawing of the text. I said this in class. Why do you do drawings of a work that's right there? It's not because I get to judge whether or not you're a good artist. It's so that I can grade you on the fact that you've actually looked at the artwork. So in order to draw something, you have to look at it. So looking at work allows you to see things and notice details that you wouldn't otherwise do in any other context. Proper citation, or what we call attribution. We'll talk about the proper way in which to do that at a later time. It has a lot to do, if you know the title of the work, that goes first. So it's title, it's the artist, it's the date, it's the time period, it's the medium. Okay, so we'll talk more about proper citation and attribution. Now then I have my sort of patented way in which you analyze art and think about the idea flow and sort of the thought capture that is required for I guess analyzing art from a historical perspective. It lets you kind of think, okay, what part am I missing? Am I missing any parts as I walk through this idea? And if you can do the marks, which is what the acronym is, if you can do the marks and you know the marks of the artwork, you can write on the artwork. It's M is message, meaning if I were to put this in a poster, what would it look like? What would be the catchphrase of this work? What's a basic summary sentence? Aesthetic is what you see with your eyes. So what do you see in the work? So you're starting on left to right, like you're reading, and just tell me what you see. Normally you're going to need pull out some vocabulary here so that you know that you can identify key features of architecture, of painting, etc. So aesthetic, but it's also just plain things like what colors are they? How do the lines feel? What's the texture like? So when we do our thematic unit on principles and elements of design, that's where the aesthetic comes into play. Represent is you interpreting the aesthetic. Once I see that there's a certain type of line quality, let's say it's like really wavy, there's a lot of frenetic sort of wavy lines. The represent would be something like, what does this mean? What is the artist trying to convey, either emotionally or religiously, or just a general idea or philosophy behind the work? So what's his color theory? In the Gothic period, again, if I were to look at this work here, I would be saying that there's some type of emphasis on windows and sacred space. And so these spaces that are created are sort of meant to remind pilgrims of their pursuit of God through these relics. You see stained glass, so that the stained glass in the colors that you see through the stained glass represent the Word of God, that God's light comes in and sort of is transformed. That's an example of an R in marks, the represent. What does the aesthetic mean? Culture then is now, why does this, what context are we in? So why is we talking about God anyways in the Gothic period, or his light and all this stuff? Well, there's a belief about God and his sort of coming into play with humanity and talking with people and having authority in the church. And so there's a culture that underrides the representing aesthetic. You can see how this flows. You start from the message, then you tell me what it means, what it looks like, what it means, and why does it mean that. So it's really a why question, the C. Lastly, symbols. Anytime you see a symbol, you identify it as such. You see something, now you're going to definitely make that final connection. Look, this means this in the work, this means this, and you're sort of coming to a conclusion about how the work appears and how to understand it. And if you're able to do that, you're gonna do fine on the test. The marks is really a key feature of this class. You can see you do about 6 per page. Sometimes the last 2 are blank, and I don't want you just to leave them blank. I want you to actually find your own. So make sure that you know that I want you to find your own if there's 2 left blank at the end here. So make sure that you do that. Vocabulary, pretty standard. It's a Cornell snapshots in which you find the part of speech and definition for each of these words. Again, the key feature of this vocabulary that this is art vocabulary. So each of these words that you have, they need to be done with artlex.com or some other type of art dictionary. Don't just say that a pinnacle, for instance, is like the height of an idea or emotion. It is an actual architectural form. So make sure that you know that I'm referring to art definitions, not just random definitions like portal. It's not just a place that you go to go between worlds or something. It's not a science thing. It's an actual door in a Gothic church. So make sure that you know that. Art speakouts are also an important bulk. They're about 50 points for these ones. If you notice here, this will be a little bit more in depth than the last time I looked at this. But we have choose one of 3 topics. So choosing one of 3 topics here. Number 1, if I were to talk about how philosophy enters into the world, so I can talk about how does the art show the development of humanism. The symbolic use of light, so I can be more specific, right? So for number 2, how does the art show light in architecture in Gothic period? Biblical themes in reliefs, so windows or sculptures, if there's anything that you could talk about from a biblical perspective. Again, thinking about the culture and context. So you can see that there's different topics for you to choose. Now, those aren't questions. Those are just topics. Your job to write is to decide on what kind of question you want to write on. And so as you see here, I've identified 7 different types of questions. If you notice here, 7 different types of questions that are on the AP test. Attribution of an artwork, compare and contrast. So attribution of an artwork, compare and contrast. Challenging a previous movement. Document-based question or DBQ. Appropriation, historical context, or a thematic question. Each one of those is different, and they sometimes have different styles of writing, and we'll go over each one of those and practice them. For right now, if you just try your best, you can attempt one, number 1 maybe, or just kind of choose one that you think you seem to make the most sense of in the context of this little sidebar, and create your question based on it. So if I'm going to do a thematic question, let's say it's number 7, and I want to do the symbolic use of light. My complex question is not just how does art show the symbolic use of light. I want to connect it to a thematic question. So I'd say something like, how does the symbolic use of light in Gothic architecture relate to the theme of religion throughout time? Now, at that point, I might also incorporate some work that I know from other cultures as well. And so I'm thinking about it from a thematic perspective. That's a good question. And now that's something I can then identify 3 works, maybe 1 work from Gothic or 2 works from Gothic, and then a 3rd work from Egypt or something like that, if light had something to do with Egyptian architecture, which it does. Pyramids used to have special marble on it, special limestone that reflected the sun. So that would be something that I would refer to as well. And then from there, we'll talk a lot about how to create thesis statements. You're not going to be left alone like that. I'm going to give you an exact formula. You're going to do great. Paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. Artist portrait. When we get into a context with artists, you want to have their purpose, their ideas, whether society liked them or not, and their style. So you can see each one of those in turn, including some works with them, and an artist sketch. So you actually sketch what they look like and kind of combine some of their works together, kind of doodle some of their sketches, like a Google sketch or Google Doodle or something like that. You can add in this spot here, a collage of 3 works. That's a question people often ask. Just make sure, again, it's just a quick little intro to one of the artists just to remember who they are. Probably if you can find at least the most important artist, or at least one of several you can choose from. A thematic unit is once a week, that in which we look at the different ways in which themes are used or represented in these reoccurring thoughts throughout history. So I actually pull real quick different works from a large span of time, and then at that point we talk about their similarities. How this breaks down is the cultural points when you identify 3 cultures discussed and their relationship to the theme. So I would choose 3, we might do 6, and you just choose 3 of them and say, how do these all fit to the theme? Let's say the theme is violence, and I choose 3 cultures that depict violence in their art. Okay, that's what I want to identify, and then quickly discuss this is what kind of violence they show. Portrait of humanity. So at this point, portrait of humanity means what does the theme reveal about what humans value? At this point, if I were talking about the theme of violence, there's different types of violence, right? And so certain cultures might talk about warfare. Others might talk about fratricide or killing of brothers. Other people might be talking about gods, fighting against the gods, fighting against centaurs, good and evil, hell and punishment. All of those types of sub-themes could be described in this portrait of humanity. What is it telling us about what humans value? The fact that everyone talks about violence. Even today, is there violence on TV? We'll talk about that when we get to that thematic unit. A summary, this is where you're going to take your general notes. So this is kind of like your thoughts, your questions, your sketches, all that kind of stuff. And then on your own, you can kind of work through the portraits of humanity and the cultural points as you need to summarize. Finally, questions to consider. What questions do you have about the art and its history? If you don't know something, because I'm talking about the modern period and we're like way far before that even occurs, maybe put down some questions and be like, I'm interested to know what the modern period is about because we talked about it a little bit. And that might be a good question to consider. It just helps you start thinking through the time in which we take to complete everything in the course. Another section of Cornell notes for you, so make sure you finish all the way to the bottom. And then the last half of the last page, art and transition. People often skip this, or they go really poorly through it. It's a Marx, so it's the same thing. Message, aesthetic, represent culture and symbols. And there it is right there in case you don't know from the art snapshot. So make sure that you know it's right here, okay, at the end, if you need help with some guiding questions on those. So if you ask me what marks are, I'm going to refer you to this video, and I'm going to refer you to the last page of every packet that you do. Commonalities between this culture, like Gothic, and departures from this culture, Gothic, from, let's say, Romanesque, because Romanesque comes before Gothic in the timeline and in the location of that particular area. It's in Western Europe. So what are some of the commonalities between Gothic and Romanesque? Well, in terms of its message, what are the commonalities? In terms of how it looks, in terms of what it represents, all those things might have similarities. It might also be departing, not just different, but that it departs. Literally, it's like evolving. So there might be some elements of Romanesque that's in the church, and certainly the similar religion, but they have some new values and new things that crop up and evolve in what it looks like as well. So really, this art in transition, not only is it a type of question on the AP test, but it's also an important idea of thinking about the transitions of art over time. Humans are similar, but they've evolved some ideas depending on what's happening in the world. And so this is an important feature of understanding and studying human behavior from a historical perspective. And that's it. So once you're done with that, you have the commonalities and you have the departures, you have notes, you have art, you have writing, you have themes, and you have an art at a glance. So to scroll all the way back up to top, notice that there's 5 pages. How many days of the week are there? You should do one of these a day. You should do at least half of it in class, if not more. And you won't have a whole lot of homework, except for what you need to read in order to be confident in the test. Well, that concludes the tutorial on how to do the AP Art History art movement packets. Again, please review this and look over these things. Give them to your parents so they can help you with it if you need help with some of the vocabulary or language, or you can come see me at lunch and I can also help answer questions for you. Thank you very much.